All right. Other news at this hour, just beyond our borders, Zimbabwe's government has insisted that President Emmerson Mnangagwa has won Wednesday's poll with nearly 53% of the vote and have dismissed any criticism. The opposition leader, Nelson Chamisa, has described official results from presidential and parliamentary elections as a sham. He says that even international observers have reached the same conclusion. Mnangagwa was elected for a second term with 52.6% of the vote. Chamisa, who leads the opposition Citizens Coalition for Change party, secured 44% of the presidential vote. The SABC did not sign the paperwork to confirm the validity of the poll. Some Zimbabwean politicians have credited the observers for reporting accurately on the controversial election. Zimbabwe is battling with a number of challenges, and the new government will face a monumental task of fixing the economy. Well, we're joined in studio by SABC International News Editor Sophie Mokoena as we take a look at the outcome of Zimbabwe elections over the weekend. Sophie, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. Perhaps you could speak to the mood and atmosphere currently on the ground in Zimbabwe and the announcement of the crocodile or President Emmerson Mnangagwa now having returned for a second term.
Well, clearly it depends who you support in relation to these elections in Zimbabwe. Those who are in support of ZANU-PF, clearly they are celebrating in different parts of the country, but you don't see the real huge sporadic celebrations in areas such as Harare that are dominated by the supporters of the opposition, the same with Bulawayo. But of course you have those who are celebrating because they support President Emmerson Mnangagwa. They also support ZANU-PF, and of course those who are not celebrating because they support Nelson Chamisa and SABC. And therefore that's the environment that's prevailing. But it's quite tense, as you are aware, that when elections are being announced in relation to results, you expect the country to celebrate and be happy, but when there's disputes, you always have this simmering tension, political and security, because then government will deploy security to ensure that they are able to deal with any eventuality in relation to perhaps the protest or violence. And therefore, clearly it will be tense in some parts of the country, while other parts of the country will be business as usual.
Well, speak to the reactions and the criticisms that have come out upon the announcement of the results. The opposition rejecting the results. They're obviously contesting based on some of the allegations, including alluding to a coup. Where to from here for them?
I think it is a difficult one. The Electoral Commission has made its, perhaps given a verdict in terms of the outcomes of the results, parliamentary and of course the presidential. And therefore, to reverse this legally, you have to go to court. But the opposition has no faith in the judicial system of Zimbabwe based on their experience and also based on what transpired leading to elections. You know that you still have members of SABC who are in prison as we speak, and the organization is saying it is because the judiciary is taking sides. You also have people who were disqualified, who wanted to contest the presidential election. In fact, one person who followed through and properly up to the end the legal way, but he didn't find joy. And therefore you have this view from those who are opposed to government that the judiciary in that country tends to support or side with government. But it will be difficult for an observer to really come to that conclusion. But the reality is there are challenges in that country, and therefore we don't know what Chamisa is up to as we speak. We know that Savio Casacuero said that he is going to write a letter to the SADC Troika, request a meeting with the SADC Troika using the report of the SADC observer missions. The report says the elections didn't meet the regional and the international standard. Now, when you talk regional, you're talking about SADC. And therefore, it is a huge, huge problem. As we speak, the observers are still in the country meeting different people so that they can find a solution to what's likely going to be an impasse between the governing party, ZANU-PF, SABC, including the Electoral Commission, as SABC has rejected the results. They didn't even sign the form.
Well, the Minister of Higher Education and Technology in Zimbabwe has condemned the European Union Election Observer Mission on its preliminary reports in relation to elections in the country. Says that the mission does not have legal obligations to question the constitution of that country. So the mission said that the elections in Zimbabwe did not meet the regional and international standards. Let's take a look before we continue with our conversation.
Zimbabweans went out to the polls on 23 August 2023 and voted in a peaceful manner, a fact that has been acknowledged by all observer missions. To say that the election was peaceful is not to say that there were no glitches or minor glitches like in any election. For example, minor glitches like the late distribution of materials in few locations were timeously corrected and within the legal framework of the country. Against this background, we also find it a bit disturbing and unfortunate that the EU Electoral Observer Mission deliberately issued a sweeping statement full of misrepresentations and allegations. It is, in great measure, the preliminary report was not based on direct observation as for our expectation, but was basically based on other indirect sources of information. We wish to emphasize that election observers were supposed to observe how an election had been conducted and may make recommendations on areas of improvement, which Zimbabwe as a sovereign state can accept or reject. It is highly unfortunate that the EU Election Observer Mission made conclusions based on hearsay and on the basis of one-sided information from the opposition, as there appears to be a wholesome adoption of their positions on many issues. We had hoped that the EU EOM would observe our elections with an open mind and be impartial as agreed in our administrative arrangement, signed between the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and International Trade and the EU, as well as the Code of Conduct for Observers. A preliminary report of this nature already points to a negative final report, which is clearly designed to damage the image of Zimbabwe. It is unacceptable for an observation mission to arrogate itself the duty to assess our democratic institutions that were constitutionally established. This, we believe, is a gross interference in the internal affairs of a sovereign state and therefore totally unacceptable.
Sophie, some fair sentiments emerging on that front. What are your comments in relation to what the ministers echoed? In the same breath, perhaps you could also speak to the responses from SADC, the AU, and even the United Nations at large.
Well, I think the European Union arrived on time. They've been there for quite a long time on the ground. And therefore, this is their report, and they can respond to the Zimbabwean government criticism in terms of what they were supposed to do there and how they should conduct themselves. But this is the report. It's not going to change. And the other issue is the SADC. SADC is a region where Zimbabwe is affiliated. In fact, the president of Zimbabwe, I don't know whether people are aware, a few weeks ago, there was a SADC summit in Angola. He is now the incoming chair of the SADC Troika organ on politics, defense, and security. And this organ, or this Troika, where you have the outgoing chair, the sitting chair, and the incoming chair, running this organ for a year, they look at issues such as these ones. Now, the question is, if this matter is taken to Troika, with President Mnangagwa being a member of Troika, having to preside or be part of that meeting, will he recuse himself? And what are his peers going to say when they read the report of the SADC mission? These are men and women who were appointed by SADC and were requested to go and do the work for SADC. And therefore, SADC can't come and distance itself from this report. I think that is why you see now only President Hageingob, the outgoing chair, has congratulated President Mnangagwa, because some leaders are looking at this report. They can't throw the SADC mission under the bus. Secondly, they know that if things don't go well in Zimbabwe, the citizens of that country are going to go to neighboring countries. And the first point of call is South Africa, is Botswana, is Mozambique. And therefore, it might be easy for Namibia to look away and not really apply its mind in terms of the report of its own SADC mission. And President Hageingob is the outgoing chair. He left the seat a few weeks ago when Hishelema took over as the chair. And therefore, he should have consulted his peers and let them issue a collective or a one statement, so that you don't have a situation where there's confusion. I don't care what they say, but working together is what they should do, because you have a problem here. You have sent people to do the work, and they have come up with the report. Whether you agree or you don't agree with the report, do it in a professional way and demonstrate leadership, because maybe he's got nothing to lose. He's leaving anyway, President Hageingob. The Secretary General of the UN has issued a statement last night raising concerns around the reports of people who have been arrested, intimidation and fear that's now prevailing. Yesterday, Chamisa had a venue for the press conference. They had to change in a short notice because everybody's scared to allow him to come and hold a meeting. That's intimidation. Hardly before the observers leave, you already have that fear. So I think the Zimbabwean government, what they should do now, at this moment, when there's confusion, when there's fear, when there's tension, they must demonstrate leadership to become and not to fuel the situation. We will be speaking to the deputy chair of the commission later today on Full View, and also the spokesperson of the president, if all goes well, in relation to what the government is saying. So let's hope that synergy will prevail and they will demonstrate diplomacy so that you don't have violence in that country.
No, absolutely. We're going to monitor developments and really see where to from here. The opposition has about a week to contest the results that obviously was announced this past weekend, and more questions and answers at this point. But Sophie, we'll leave it there for now. Thank you for your time with us on the SABC at this hour. Sophie Mokoena bringing us the latest on the back of the announcement of the Zimbabwe elections. We know that President Emerson Mnangagwa has returned for a second term with just over 52% of the vote. We also know that the opposition are contesting those results. So we'll have to see what develops from there on too.